The Insurrection in Dublin, Easter Monday, 1916. This has taken everyone by surprise. It is possible that, with the exception of their staff, it has taken the volunteers themselves by surprise. But today our peaceful city is no longer peaceful. Guns are sounding or rolling and crackling from different directions, and although rarely, the rattle of machine guns can be heard also. It was bank holiday, but for employments such as mine, they are not any holidays, so I went to my office in the National Gallery at the usual hour and transacted what business was necessary. Peace was in the building, and if any of the attendants had knowledge or rumour of war, they did not mention it to me. At 1 o'clock I went to lunch. Passing the corner of Merrion Row, I saw two small groups of people. These people were regarding steadfastly in the direction of St. Stephen's Green Park, and they spoke occasionally to one another with that detached confidence which proved they were mutually unknown. I also, but without approaching them, stared in the direction of the green. I saw nothing but the narrow street which widened to the park. Some few people were standing in tentative attitudes and all looking in the one direction. As I turned from them homewards, I received an impression of silence and expectation and excitement. On the way home, I noticed that many silent people were standing in their doorways, an unusual thing in Dublin outside of the back streets. The glance of a Dublin man or woman conveys generally a criticism of one's personal appearance and is a little hostile to the passer. The look of each person as I passed was steadfast and contained an inquiry instead of a criticism. I felt faintly uneasy, but withdrew my mind to a meditation which I had covenanted with myself to perform daily, and passed to my house. There I was told that there had been a great deal of rifle firing all the morning, and we concluded that the military recruits or volunteer detachments were practising that arm. My return to business was by the way I had already come. At the corner of Merrion Row I found the same silent groups who were still looking in the direction of the green and addressing each other occasionally with the detached confidence of strangers. Suddenly, on the spur of the moment, I addressed one of these silent gazers. "Has there been an accident?" said I. I indicated the people standing about. "What's all this for?" He was a sleepy, rough-looking man, about 40 years of age, with a blunt red moustache and the distant eyes which one sees in sailors. He looked at me, stared at me as at a person from a different country. He grew wakeful and vivid. "Don't you know?" said he, and then he saw that I did not know. "The Sinn Féiners have seized the city this morning." "Oh," said I. He continued with the savage earnestness of one who has amazement in his mouth. "They seized the city at 11 o'clock this morning. The green there is full of them. They have captured the castle. They have taken the post office." "My God," said I, staring at him, and instantly I turned and went running towards the green. In a few seconds I banished astonishment and began to walk. As I drew near the green, rifle fire began like sharply cracking whips. It was from the further side. I saw that the gates were closed and men were standing inside with guns on their shoulders. I passed a house, the windows of which were smashed in. As I went by, a man in civilian clothes slipped through the park gates, which instantly closed behind him. He ran towards me and I halted. He was carrying two small packets in his hand. He passed me hurriedly, and placing his leg inside the broken window of the house behind me, he disappeared. Almost immediately, another man in civilian clothes appeared from the broken window of another house. He also had something, I don't know what, in his hand. He ran urgently towards the gates, which opened, admitted him, and closed again. In the centre of this side of the park, a rough barricade of carts and motor cars had been sketched. It was still full of gaps. Behind it was a halted tram, and along the vistas of the green one saw other trams, derelict, untenanted. I came to the barricade. As I reached it and stood by the Shelburne Hotel, which it faced, a loud cry came from the park. The gates opened and 3 men ran out. 2 of them held rifles with fixed bayonets. The third gripped a heavy revolver in his fist. They ran towards a motor car which had just turned the corner and halted it. The men with bayonets took position instantly on either side of the car. The man with the revolver saluted, and I heard him begging the occupants to pardon him and directing them to dismount. A man and woman got down. They were again saluted and requested to go to the sidewalk. They did so. The man crossed and stood by me. He was very tall and thin, middle-aged, with a shaven, wasted face. "I want to get down to Armagh today," he said to no one in particular. The loose, bluish skin under his eyes was twitching. The volunteers directed the chauffeur to drive to the barricade and lodge his car in a particular position there. He did it awkwardly, and after 3 attempts, he succeeded in pleasing them. He was a big brown-faced man whose knees were rather high for the seat he was in, and they jerked with the speed and persistence of something moved with a powerful spring. His face was composed and fully under command, although his legs were not. Still preserving all the solemnity of his features, these 2 men did not address a word to each other, but their drilled and expressionless eyes were loud with surprise and fear and rage. They went into the hotel. I spoke to the man with the revolver. He was no more than a boy, not more certainly than 20 years of age, short in stature, with close curling red hair and blue eyes, a kindly-looking lad. The strap of his sombrero had torn loose on one side, and except while he held it in his teeth, it flapped about his chin. His face was sunburnt and grimy with dust and sweat. This young man did not appear to me to be acting from his reason. He was doing his work from a determination implanted previously, days, weeks perhaps, on his imagination. His mind was where? It was not with his body, and continually his eyes went searching wildly, looking for spaces, scanning hastily the clouds, the vistas of the streets, looking for something that did not hinder him, looking away for a moment from the immediacies and rigours which were impressed where his mind had been. When I spoke, he looked at me, and I know that for some seconds he did not see me. I said, "What is the meaning of all this? What has happened?" He replied collectedly enough in speech, but with that ramble and errancy clouding his eyes. "We have taken the city. We are expecting an attack from the military at any moment, and those people," he indicated knots of men, women and children clustered towards the end of the green, "won't go home for me. We have the post office and the railways and the castle. We have all the city. We have everything." Some men and 2 women drew behind me to listen. "This morning," said he, "the police rushed us. One ran at me to take my revolver. I fired, but I missed him. And I hit a—" "You have far too much talk," said a voice to the young man. I turned a few steps away, and glancing back saw that he was staring after me, but I know that he did not see me. He was looking at turmoil and blood and at figures that ran towards him and ran away, a world in motion and he in the centre of it, astonished. The men with him did not utter a sound. They were both older. One indeed a short, sturdy man with a heavy white moustache. He was quite collected and took no notice of the skies or the spaces. He saw a man in rubbers placing his hand on a motor bicycle in the barricade and called to him instantly, "Let that alone." The motorist did not at once remove his hand, whereupon the white-moustached man gripped his gun in both hands and ran violently towards him. He ran directly to him, body to body, and as he was short and the motorist was very tall, stared fixedly up in his face. He roared up at his face in a mighty voice, "Are you deaf? Are you deaf? Move back." The motorist moved away, pursued by an eye as steady and savage as the point of the bayonet that was level with it. Another motor car came round the Ely Place corner of the green and wobbled at the sight of the barricade. The 3 men who had returned to the gates roared, "Halt! but the driver made a tentative effort to turn his wheel. A great shout of many voices came then, and then 3 men ran to him. "Drive to the barricade," came the order. The driver turned his wheel a point further towards escape, and instantly one of the men clapped a gun to the wheel and blew the tyre open. Some words were exchanged, and then a shout, "Drive it on the rim! Drive it!" The tone was very menacing, and the motorist turned his car slowly to the barricade and placed it in. For an hour I tramped the city, seeing everywhere these knots of watchful strangers speaking together in low tones, and it sank into my mind that what I had heard was true, and that the city was in insurrection. It had been promised for so long, and it had been threatened for so long. Now it was here. I had seen it in the Green. Others had seen it in other places. The same men clad in dark green and equipped with rifle, bayonet and bandolier, the same silent activity. The police had disappeared from the streets. At that hour I did not see one policeman, nor did I see one for many days. And men said that several of them had been shot earlier in the morning, that an officer had been shot in Portobello Bridge, that many soldiers had been killed, and that a good many civilians were dead also. Around me as I walked, the rumour of war and death was in the air. Continually and from every direction rifles were crackling and rolling. Sometimes there was only one shot. Again it would be a roll of firings crested with a single short explosions, and sinking again to whip-like snaps and whip-like echoes. Then for a moment silence, and then again the guns leaped in the air. The rumour of positions, bridges, public places, railway stations, government offices, having been seized was persistent and was not denied by any voice. But there were not very many people in the streets. The greater part of the population were away on bank holiday and did not know anything of this business. Many of them would not know anything until they found that they had to walk home from Kingstown, Docky House, or wherever they were. I returned to my office, decided that I would close it for the day. The men were very relieved when I came in, and were more relieved when I ordered the gong to be sounded. There were some few people in the place, and they were soon put out. The outer gates were locked and the great door, but I kept the men on duty until the evening. We were the last public institution open. All the others had been closed for hours. At 5 o'clock I left, and I stood below the Shelbourne Hotel, looking at the barricade and into the park. We could see nothing. Not a volunteer was in sight. The green seemed a desert. There were only the trees to be seen, and through them small green vistas of sward. Just then a man stepped onto the footpath and walked directly to the barricade. He stopped and gripped the shafts of a lorry lodged near the centre. At that instant, the park exploded into life and sound, and from nowhere armed men appeared at the railings, and they all shouted at the man, "Put down that lorry! Let out and go away! Let out at once!" These were the cries. The man did not let out. He halted with the shafts in his hand and looked towards the vociferous palings. Then, and very slowly, he began to draw the lorry out of the barricade. The shouts came to him again, very loud, very threatening, but he did not attend to them. "He is the man that owns the lorry," said a voice beside me. Dead silence fell on the people around while the man slowly drew his cart down by the footpath. Then 3 shots rang out in succession. At the distance he could not be missed, and it was obvious they were trying to frighten him. He dropped the shafts, and instead of going away, he walked over to the volunteers. "He is a nerve," said another voice behind me. The man walked directly towards the volunteers, who, to the number of about 10, were lining the railings. He walked slowly, bent a little forward, with one hand raised and one finger up as though he was going to make a speech. 10 guns were pointing at him, and a voice repeated many times, "Go and put back that lorry, or you're a dead man. Go before I count 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. A rifle spat at him, and in two undulating movements the man sank on himself and sagged to the ground. I ran to him with some others, while a woman screamed unmeaningly, all in one strident note. The man was picked up and carried to a hospital beside the Arts Club. There was a hole in the top of his head, and one does not know how ugly blood can look until it's been clotted in hair. As the poor man was being carried in, a woman plunked to her knees on the road and began not to scream, but to screech. At that moment the volunteers were hated. The men by whom I was and who were lifting the body roared into the railings, "We'll be coming back for you, damn you." From the railings there came no reply, and in an instant the place was again desert and silent, and the little green vistas were slumbering among the trees. The knots were increasing about the streets, for now the bank holiday people began to wander back from the places that were not distant, and to them it had all to be explained anew. Free movement was possible everywhere in the city, but the constant crackle of rifles restricted somewhat that freedom. Up to 1 o'clock at night, belated travellers were straggling into the city, and curious people were wandering from group to group, still trying to gather information. I remained awake until 4 o'clock in the morning. Every 5 minutes a rifle cracked somewhere, but about 11:45 sharp following came from the direction of Portobello Bridge and died away after some time. The windows of my flat listened out towards the Green and obliquely towards Sackville Street. In another quarter of an hour there were volleys from Stephen's Green direction, and this continued with intensity for about 25 minutes. Then it fell into a sputter of fire and ceased. I went to bed about 4 o'clock, convinced that the Green had been rushed by the military and captured, and that the rising was at an end. That was the first day of the insurrection.